Welcome everybody. My name is Gerard Daché. I'm the Executive Director of the Government Blockchain Association. Today we're talking about a really cool subject. Mark Wasser and I will be talking about decentralized finance and banking transformation. Now, one of the things about GBA events is it's a very sort of collaborative, participative thing. So I've got a bunch of slides. We're going to walk through some stuff, but really these slides are intended to be uh, a catalyst for communication and conversation. So GBA is one of those great communities where we have just a tremendous number of smart people, much smarter than I. So we really like to sort of collaborate. Okay, and so let's get started. So my name is Gerard Daché. I don't have Mark's information up here, but I'm going to ask Mark, why don't you drop your contact information in the chat? And then also anybody else, if you'd like to drop information in the chat about who you are, what you're doing. Juan, I know you are very good about that. So guys, feel free to do that. And if you don't mind, put the location where you're in also. All right. And again, if you want to, if you send me a LinkedIn request, unfortunately, I am at the 30K limit. So unfortunately, I can't accept any more at this point. Just let me tell you a little bit about the GBA. So we are an industry association. We have about 20,000 people associated with us across about 120 cities around the world. We have about 50 working groups. They're not all active at the same time at any given point in time. You know, some are more active than others. We do have an education certification program. We do these online events. We have a huge amount of resources on our website. We have over 8 gigs of information. We've got a YouTube channel, podcast, like I just told you about, publications, articles, all kinds of stuff. It's member uploaded content. So GBA is known as a place where people around the world go to get information about blockchain, specifically as it relates to government. Right, and we're going to talk about today a new paradigm. So if you've taken any GBA courses, you know, you can take a lot of courses about the technology, but we talk a lot about the history and where things have come from, because I think it's important to understand what are the underlying trends and motivations in order to understand where we're going in the future. All right, and Mark, is there anything that you want to add to this agenda?
No, thank you. Not that I see at the moment.
Okay, and I'm sure if anything pops up, by all means, feel free to jump in. So let me start with a brief history of blockchain. So again, I think it's important to understand where we come from. So it's, you know, blockchain is not, you know, people talk about Bitcoin and the Satoshi white paper. The concept has actually been around for quite a while, right? And you know, in 1982, David Schoen wrote this dissertation about computer systems established, maintained, and trusted by mutually suspicious groups, right? And Scott Hayden, and I know, I'm sorry, Scott Sternetta, and I've had a chance to talk with him about this. He was concerned that as we moved into the future, we would be increasingly living in a world where more of the records were digital, and there was really no way to know the authenticity of a digital record. So that's the problem that he was trying to solve, and they actually put the very first blockchain into production in 1991. In fact, if you look at the Satoshi white paper, there's 8 references. 3 of those references belong to Stuart and Scott. In fact, Scott's going to be a keynote speaker at an event that we have coming up, Government Blockchain Week in September. And then 2008 rolled around. There was a global financial crisis, right? The worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, right? We had the subprime mortgage crisis, the international bank crisis, the European debt crisis. And the common phrase that you heard were that the financial institutions were too big to fail. So the response was a massive bailout, right? And that inflamed many people. So we had the Occupy Wall Street responses to this massive bailout. And the concern was that the folks at the top got protected and everybody else paid the price, right? And this was followed by a global economic downturn in the Great Recession. So it's important to understand that that's what was happening when this little white paper emerged with about 8 pages, it's referred to as the Satoshi white paper. And it basically said, hey, I have this idea about how we can move currency from peer to peer without the banks. And if you look in the Genesis block of the Bitcoin blockchain, the headline from the Times of London talking about the bank bailout is literally what's in the very first block of the Bitcoin blockchain. So it's important to understand where we typically say that this is the beginning. It really wasn't the beginning. It was in response to a very significant sort of social economic ill. And at the time and since, there's been a great distrust for large, powerful institutions, right? And these are just some headlines, right? 5,300 Wells Fargo employees fired for creating millions of fake accounts, right? The old adage, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And we see that the public trust in government has been waning. We can look at the headlines today, tomorrow, this week, last year, and sort of talk about all of these terrible things that are happening. But the reality is that this public trust in government has been waning since really the Vietnam War. And it was in that space where we saw this sweeping populist movement, right? Populism, not necessarily nationalism, but more like populism. And it was those forces that really resulted in the tremendous popularity of Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. And they both had very, very different messages, right? I'm an outsider. I'm not part of the big establishment. Regardless of how long they've been in government or how wealthy they were or connected to the financial wealth, their message was, I'm outside of that. and they both were enormously popular, and their fans were very passionate about that particular message. And it's the same thing that led to Brexit, right? We don't want to be under the control of this large European entity. We want independence and freedom. So then, on May 22nd, I think of 2009 or 10, the first Bitcoin transaction happened. It was 10,000 Bitcoins for 2 Domino's pieces. And little by little, everybody else started coming on board. And if you've checked the headlines recently, you can now buy Bitcoin with PayPal. All of these places that essentially said no for a long time, they're all sort of lining up. To the degree that if in 2009, if you had $1, well, if you had $2, you could either take that dollar, put it under your pillow and leave it there, or you could buy 500 Bitcoins with it. By 2020, your dollar under the pillow would be worth about 83 cents. And those 500 Bitcoins would be worth over $9 million. And then the numbers are even higher today. Why is that? Again, I keep going back to these underlying trends. What was it that did this, right? It wasn't just that somebody had a hot idea, there was a hot stock. There's something really fundamentally systemic, right, that was happening. And today, the value of cryptocurrency is larger than all of these national GDPs. So while the cryptocurrency space is still small compared to the global economy, in terms of what's happened in about a little over 10 years, it's really significant. And so while Bitcoin was the very first cryptocurrency, well, it's arguably it's the first main adopted cryptocurrency, right? Today, there's a bunch more. There's literally thousands. And each of these cryptocurrencies, and some we'll call them junk coins, whatever, they all have a variety of different uses, applications, communities. But what we're seeing is the massive fragmentation of economic systems. And on top of that, while the Bitcoin blockchain was sort of the first major blockchain, right? And then we had the fork of Ethereum. Today, there's a gazillion more, right? So as we're going to move into decentralized finance, it's important to understand that there's not just one blockchain, right? There's not just it's not a monolithic thing. There's lots and lots of different blockchains. Some are public, some are private, some are fast, some are slow, some are more secure than others, some are more private too. So there's this incredible diversity in different blockchains. And so from a regulation standpoint, imagine the challenge of regulating thousands of different cryptocurrencies on hundreds or thousands of different blockchains. And around those blockchains, entire ecosystems have developed, right? And so there's applications and associations and exchanges, financial service infrastructures. Some of these are regulated, some are completely outside of government regulation. So that's just a little bit about the history in terms of where we've come from. Anybody have any thoughts or comments on, Mark, you have any, let me start with you, Mark, you have any thoughts or comments on where we've come from to today?
So there's actually a lot more than cryptocurrency which needs to be considered. The Generation 2 blockchains have smart contracts, which are, of course, the basis for DeFi. And then there are a number of improvements also as you go forward. In particular, Bitcoin, unfortunately, is proof of work, which tends to lead to a very limited capacity for transactions, and also can be a fairly slow speed. Though, of course, Ethereum is also proof of work currently and has about a 2-second transaction speed and a much greater volume than Bitcoin. And there are also things like the new Binance Smart Chain, which is a private variant on Ethereum, which actually has very, very reasonable transaction rates. It basically is currently running at 15 cents a transaction like Ethereum used to, until suddenly its per transaction prices for simple transactions have gone up in order of a couple orders of magnitude to $15.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about some examples. And Mark, when we get to later in the presentation, let's talk about some of those different platforms and maybe some of the comparative advantages. I'm sure a lot of people are going to ask questions like that. Okay, so the reason I brought you through that process is because I want to take you to this next area, really talking about a new paradigm, right? Because it's important to understand how this technology potentially is impacting us now and where it's going. And when I believe personally, and a lot of my friends have heard me say this, blockchain is the most transformative technology in human history, right? Why? Because a lot of technology has been about communication, and with our ability to communicate more and more, better and better, our ability to communicate, coordinate, and control has expanded. So we've gone from a concentration of power, management, leadership, whatever you want to call it, from tribal to villages, to kingdoms, city-states, nation-states, and then these global institutions like the UN, right? Global banks, Google, Amazon, right? And so over the course of human history, we have communicated, coordinated, and controlled at larger and larger levels. Blockchain is one of the first technologies that really decentralizes or reverses that concentration of power. And when we talk about a paradigm shift, what are we talking about? Paradigms are the lenses by which we view the data, understand the context, and determine the outcomes. So as we move through this next phase in history, right, we need to actually look at many of the things that we do that we've just kind of assumed all along, right, work. And we need to start really asking some questions and challenging our thought process. And when we do this, it potentially we see the same world, right? But now we see new opportunities, right? New boundaries and constraints. It's looking at the world through entirely different lenses. And whenever there is a paradigm shift, right, you'll see winners and losers. Why? Because some people are like this prospector on the left, and others are like the ostrich on the right. And so the message that we're trying to let people know is, guys, you've got to put your ear to the rail. You've got to see what's coming, and you've got to think about things in entirely new ways. And I just threw a couple of these in because I think it's hysterical, right? These are just some quotes, right? So William Preece of the British Post Office in 1876 said, the Americans have need for the telephone, but we don't. We have plenty of messenger boys, right? And I like this, as Henry Ford's lawyer said, the horse is here to stay, but the automobile is only a novelty, a fad. And I was in Bahrain recently, trying to explain to them the difference between this DeFi cryptocurrency space and the traditional banking system. And I said, listen, and Mark talked about some of the challenges with Bitcoin. I said, look, if you would have compared a horse in the 1890s to an automobile, right? Clearly the horse is a better transportation solution, right? If the automobile breaks down out of town, what are you going to do, right? You're going to have to get your horse and drag it back home. You have to send a letter to Detroit, have them make a part. Months later, you'll have that part. What if you run out of gas? There's no gas stations or roads, right? But I was saying them to their office, which is right down the street from the Indy 5. They have a Formula One racetrack, right? And I said, but today the horse compared to the automobile is an entirely different comparison, right? I like this. Thomas Watson, the president of IBM, said, I think that there's a world market for maybe 5 computers. And then these are these are just some of the other predictions. Right. My favorite one is the founder 3 comes. And I predict the internet will soon go spectacularly supernova in 1996 and catastrophically collapse. Right. Of course, we saw the same thing with Bitcoin. Right. Ever since these things started coming out, there were Bitcoin obituaries. In fact, there's a website, I think it's called 99 Bitcoins. If you go there, they'll show you hundreds of Bitcoin obituaries talking about how cryptocurrency is a passing fad. And these wrong consequences, these wrong paradigms have consequences, right? So I'd like to go, this is an example, right? The Titanic, the engineers believed that God himself couldn't sink the Titanic. In fact, that was the headlines on the New York Times. And because of that, they had inadequate planning. There weren't enough lifeboats. There was reckless navigation. They failed to accept facts. So the SS California literally saw from a distance the ship sinking. They literally saw the tail of the Titanic in the air, but they did not believe that the Titanic could sink. So they just kept sailing. And when we think of our financial system today, right? And when I first started talking to people about cryptocurrency, their initial response was anger, because we're talking about a paradigm that is so intrinsic to how we live our lives, our whole life, right? It's connected to money and the transference of value. When you sort of threaten that, it's cognitive dissonance. People they hear the words, but their mind just can't wrap around it, right? And so even when we talk about experts, right? And Mark and I were talking about this related to another subject, right? When Edison started putting light bulbs in people's homes, right? The gas companies essentially said, "Don't do this. If you put electricity in your home, that's like unbridled lightning. It'll electrocute your husband. Your house will catch on fire, and you'll be a broke, homeless widow," right? Because the gas companies didn't want people to stop buying kerosene. Well, Edison won, and they eventually switched to petroleum for cars, and that's what happened. But we have to understand that a lot of the things that you hear by people may potentially come from an inherent conflict of interest or bias. And so even when the experts are telling you something, right? I like to say, if you take the word expert, you break it down into 2 words. It's X, which is former has been, and spurt, which is a drip under pressure, right? But Warren Buffett and all of the folks that have expertise in the existing financial system may not have expertise or understanding in this new system. So you always have to pass the things through that make sense to us. All right. So let's move into banking, right? When we talk about a bank, and Berenberg, as far as I know, is sort of the first bank today that has been the oldest bank. I think that they were started in the late 1400s. But a bank is a regulated financial institution that accepts deposits, right, from the public. It creates a demand deposit, right, and while simultaneously making loans, right? Lending activities can be directly performed by the bank or indirectly through different capital markets. So what is decentralized finance? It's a blockchain-based form of finance that does not rely on central financial intermediaries such as brokers, exchanges, or banks. It offers traditional financial instruments, and instead of using those centralized organizations, it uses smart contracts that Mark was just talking about, right? Blockchains like Ethereum, Binance is another one. There's several now, and they use a layered architecture and highly composable building blocks. And how is it used today? So the DeFi platforms allow people to lend or borrow funds from others, right? Speculate on price movements on a range of assets using derivatives, right? They allow people to trade cryptocurrencies, insure against risk, and earn interest in savings accounts or in these vehicles that are very similar to savings accounts. So if you look at the functions of a bank, those functions essentially are being duplicated in the DeFi space. And so when I started looking at this, and I asked myself, hey, look, is this just a bubble? Is this like real? I was pretty much astounded, right? If you look at the dates here, in June of 2020, the total assets under value or the value that were locked in smart contracts in June of 2020 it was 1 billion, right? By October 2020, it was 11 billion. By January, it was over 20 billion. February is over 40 billion, right? And in March, at the end of March, it was over 60 billion. And to give you a sense of the proportion or magnitude, there's more value locked in DeFi platforms, right? Locked up in smart contracts than the top 32 banks of the world combined. And this is in the period of a very short amount of time. So if we look a little bit at the history of DeFi, right? Really, the first DeFi that we really saw was a MakerDAO. It was a stablecoin based lending platform. It was the first DeFi application to receive significant use. It allowed users to borrow their native token is called DAI or DAI, DAI, right? And you would be pegged against the US dollar. And then smart contracts on Ethereum governed the loan, the repayments, and the liquidation process in a completely decentralized and autonomous manner. In June 2020, Compound Finance came along and they upped the ante a little bit. They started rewarding lenders and borrowers of cryptocurrencies on its own platform with an additional type of interest payment to lenders. This new unit of currency is known as Comp, which is their token. And Comp is actually used for governance of their platform. And it's also tradable on exchanges. So you're now starting to see the integration of the money and the governance. And then since then, all kinds of other platforms have followed suit. And they've launched this phenomenon called yield farming or liquidity mining, right? And this is where the speculators they actively shift cryptocurrency assets between different pools in a platform and between different platforms to maximize their total yield. And it includes not only interest and fees, but also the value of additional tokens. And this is sort of, if we sort of compare this with how people try to develop liquid assets in the ICO craze, right, which was a big bubble bust, this essentially it's just a different way of generating liquidity. And so this concept of liquidity mining, and I can't even tell you that I really fully understand it. Mark, if you do, or if anybody else does, that would be awesome to kind of lend some additional perspective.
Yes, I do understand it, so I can step in when you're done.
Yeah, well, listen, why don't you talk through liquidity mining, because I think I understand it at a very high level, but I'm fascinated by this subject.
Sure, absolutely. So liquidity mining currently is providing enough currency on both sides of a given pair so that the exchange can easily transfer from one to the other, convert from one to the other without necessarily having to go through a market. Generally, the provider of these exchange services, of course, charges a fee for the exchange services. And they also try to keep a balance so that they keep similar values on both sides of the pair. people can loan money to this liquidity pool, and they can be rewarded with part of the fees for the transfers. But many of the people who do the transfers also tend to provide additional incentives in terms of their own tokens. Most people have heard of Uniswap. Uniswap is the largest, I believe, Ethereum-based exchange service and liquidity pool. Uh, Unfortunately, currently, due to the high transaction fees that Ethereum now has, um, it is rapidly being eclipsed by other similar DeFi systems. Um, uh, One of the fastest growing systems currently is PancakeSwap. I am aware of a lot of the new up and coming DeFi systems do use PancakeSwap. The liquidity farms are actually a very interesting phenomena. You can actually get insanely high return rates, particularly against new cryptocurrencies, or in particular, if the
Power on. The Bluetooth device is ready to pair.
Lou, I'm going to put you on. I'm going to put you on mute until you're ready to say something. Go ahead, Mark.
Sure. Particularly if the system provides their own token. Everyone is used to the fact that blockchains regularly create tokens. So liquidity providers both create and provide these tokens and provide additional advantages to these tokens, including a portion of the fees. So there is incentive to get these tokens as well. There are also some games in terms of when a cryptocurrency wants to ensure that they're regularly traded, they can increase their odds of that being done if there is a coin pair that includes them on such a system. Um, I tend to be heavily into games, for example, and there are in-game currencies that set up liquidity pools and gave really good incentives for people to provide money to the liquidity pool. Things that were generally immediately equivalent to 10% of the money that you deposited, and an interest rate that's well in excess of 25%. In other cases, I've seen new DeFi pools start up with interest rates exceeding 300%. There is, of course, always the question as to whether or not systems of this type are legit. Um, you certainly, before wanting to get into DeFi, want to ensure that you're able to verify their smart contracts. You also want their smart contracts to be audited. You should also be very, very aware that as liquidity pools get larger and larger, and as the token that is provided as rewards increases in number, the liquidity pool will rapidly, or not so rapidly, but reasonably rapidly drop in terms of their return. There are also a good number of scams, obviously, out there. So you need to be very, very careful where you put your money.
Mark, let me pause for a second, see if anybody's got any questions. And while people are formulating their questions, because this I think is a new concept for a lot of folks, I just want to answer some of the questions that were in the chat. So this is being recorded, and it will be on the GBA YouTube channel. So to get there quickly, if you go to gbaglobal.org, go to the top of the page, under resources, go down to the videos link and you'll see this. It generally takes our production team a couple days to get it listed up there. And at the end of the presentation, there's a QR code, so you can get the a link to download the whole presentation. Dennis, do you want to ask your question, and then I'll if you want to unmute, because I kind of like to get participation. Dennis, are you still there? I see you. There you go. All right. Well, Dennis asked if are NFTs included in the numbers reflecting the locked assets in DeFi. So remember, I showed the picture of all those different blockchains. Here's one of the problems. The numbers that I have, and I can go back. First of all, NFTs, like any other token, are exchanged on a variety of different platforms, right? Some are regulated exchanges, some are not, right? Some are known, some are maybe unknown. And so I believe that the numbers that are on that report are actually low, because there's really, those are the numbers that we know about, but there's really no way to know all the numbers. There's no like registry of blockchains and exchanges and stuff like that. Dennis, did you want to elaborate on that at all, or does that answer your question?
That did answer that question. There is a broader question that I have, though, and that is that in general, are the DeFi numbers that we see, including NFTs, non-fungible tokens,
Right.
or are NFTs not considered part of DeFi? So that's my general overall question, actually.
In general, NFTs aren't considered part of DeFi. Most of the time, NFTs are sold on given markets. You could certainly claim that peer-to-peer NFT deals are DeFi, but most of those are actually brokered by, for example, the most recent ones that made the most money were brokered by auction houses, which are obviously centralized. Most NFTs that are successful these days are actually those which are for collectible card games on the internet. Basically, if you took something like Magic the Gathering and moved that online, there are many card games where to get to a playable deck, even, it will cost you several $1,000s. And many of the top players don't necessarily even have complete decks after spending $50,000.
So okay, so not to spend any, inordinate amount of time on this, but just to go a little further. So I think that the greatest example of an NFT, for anybody that doesn't understand what it might be, would be that the head of Twitter created his first tweet as an NFT and then auctioned it off. So we see this as kind of a electronic digital version of art, right? So my question then, I guess, backs up into, is art, or the purchase of art for an investment, part of finance? Because really what we're talking about here is DeFi is equal to finance, except it's decentralized, with savings, loans, everything. Is that true too of the purchase of art for an investment? Is that part of finance / DeFi?
I would certainly agree that it's part of finance, but as I said before, it's really a question of how the sale or the transfer is made. Most of these really high value things went through auction houses, which are definitely not decentralized.
Yes.
Mark, you want to talk a little bit about asset-backed tokens, because it's kind of related to the way that like real estate is connected to finance, right?
Right. So one of the things that a number of companies have started doing is tokenizing various assets. You can set up ownership for an entire, say, piece of real estate and thereby transfer it on the blockchain. But that's actually less interesting than allowing people to get portions of a share of, for instance, a real estate asset. It dramatically simplifies people pooling money to buy large assets. Um, it makes things of this sort much more reachable by the average individual. Whether or not that's DeFi is, again, an interesting question.
Hey, hey, Mark.
Generally,
Oh, I just want to throw something in. If you think about the supply of money, right? And again, this goes back to the paradigm. Our paradigm right now is that our economics, our monetary policy is set by the Federal Reserve, and they monitor certain things to make sure that inflation rate stays at about 2%, which is to a degree when we shut the economy down and we brought the velocity of money down to close to zero, right? They had to have this huge infusion of new money to make so that essentially the value of the dollar didn't collapse, right? But what's fascinating here, and Mark, if I didn't mean to cut you off, but I want to kind of inject this into the conversation. In the future, as we have tokens, it essentially can act as different forms of money, right? Instead of being backed by the full faith and credit of the United States, or prior to that gold, we now will start seeing monetary instruments backed by hard, tangible assets, right? And Mark, I didn't want to steal your thunder, but I wanted to inject that part of the conversation. And then when you're done, if you guys would like to ask your questions, stuff like that, we'd be happy to just raise your hands and you can unmute yourself when recognized.
So we've always had non-currency forms of money, like commodities, like real estate. The thing about them is that they're not easily fungible. When you tokenize something, it's much, much easier to divide it up. It's much, much easier to trade it for other things. It makes it vastly simpler. There was a huge step forward when there became markets for trading commodities. But yes, absolutely, we're reaching the point now where we have actual money, i.e. cryptocurrency, that's outside of the purview of the government, or certainly in terms of issuing it. Governments are obviously trying to tax it. It could be that an alternate definition for decentralized finance is that it is outside of centralized control, like the government's. I just generally haven't heard it have that meaning that often.
Mukesh, would you like to answer? Would you like to ask your question? So her questions are about regulations around DeFi, and are there any legal recourses? I'll throw my answer out, and then I'll throw it over to Mark and anybody else who wants to answer. So what you have to understand is laws apply to people. Laws don't apply to crypto, right? So for example, if you make capital gains and you pay your taxes on it, then there's no problem. If you make capital gains and you don't report it and pay your taxes, then you potentially will be fined or go to jail, right? So the laws don't change, they apply to people. But what does change is it makes it much, much more difficult for the government to have visibility into what's happening, right? And so, and from a regulation standpoint, again, cryptocurrency, dollars are not right. We don't regulate dollars, right? We manage the supply of dollars, right, through the Fed, but the government can't do that. So when you talk about sort of regulation, you just have to kind of put it in the right box. one of the big challenges that governments are going to have to deal with is as this thing and we've talked a little bit about the growth of this, but when we talk, in a little bit we'll talk about the impact. The government's going to have to make governments around the world are going to have to make a lot of choices about how they're going to adapt to this very rapidly changing ecosystem. Mark, did you have any thoughts or comments on that?
Sure. So there are actually three things which are worth mentioning. One is there any sort of recourse for scams? And the answer is that legally there should be recourse and there are laws in place for it. But realistically, they are not enforceable because of the nature of cryptocurrency. Trying to find the person who has scammed people is generally next to impossible. Then there are jurisdictional problems and everything else. When you talk about governments taxing and the like, crypto again has regulations in terms of what an individual has to report and what they don't have to report. There are, however, a lot of loopholes where crypto manages to squirrel through cracks that only the rich have previously been able to use. For example, it is relatively easy to set up a corporation in Panama. I believe there are places that offer, full service corporation setups for less than $1,000. You could move 100% of your cryptocurrency operations to that corporation, and effectively, this is not financial advice, but the understanding of many people is that then you are covered by the laws of Panama and the laws of US citizens owning shares of Panamanian countries, which most people understand to mean that it's tax-free until you decide to ship it back to the individual or something, if indeed you do that. This will continue to be a major problem. The third thing that I was going to mention is that you really, really, really don't want to count on anonymity when you're talking about cryptocurrency. Bitcoin is actually pseudonymous. And what that means is that you always have identifying numbers, i.e. your wallets. The federal government is now very, very good at being able to figure out who owns each of these wallets by the flow of currency through the networks. Do not assume that you are safe because Bitcoin is quote unquote anonymous. You can be tracked.
Mark, let me add I'm not, and I don't disagree with anything you said, but let me add sort of a counterpoint. So before we talk about all these different cryptocurrencies, right? The government, let's face it, Bitcoin is a very sort of standard known cryptocurrency, right? But as you start moving away from Bitcoin to many of these lesser known currencies that are traded on different decentralized exchanges, then it becomes much, much harder for the government to be as good as they are with Bitcoin. So with Bitcoin, that Mark's 100% right, for primarily for two reasons. Number one, Bitcoin has an immutable chain of custody record, so you can track that chain of custody back. And number two, most people when they started engaging with Bitcoin did it through a regulated exchange like Coinbase, and they're required to comply with government requirements and reporting, right? However, as we move into the future and more people start interacting with decentralized wallets and things like that, it will become increasingly, so right now the government's very good at connecting the dots because you're interacting with the Bitcoin blockchain through a regulated exchange. The government knows who you are at that point, right? They can follow the chain of custody. But as we move forward, and if people start going away from those regulated exchanges, it will then become more difficult. They'll still have tools, right? They can look at IP addresses, they can use old style least investigating. But at the present time, I think Mark is 100% correct, but that may change in the future. And again, going back to the concept of, and Mark, I'm doing some stuff with the TON folks, and I have some TON crystal, and you start looking at all of those different cryptocurrencies. It's almost impossible to think, and look, I don't know, but I think it's almost impossible for the government to stay ahead of every token and coin on every blockchain, and many of these will not even be on any kind of regulated exchanges. It just kind of explodes in complexity.
So there are several things there. One is I believe you're absolutely correct. It's not worth the federal government's time and effort to go after the smaller cryptocurrencies. I would, however, be very surprised if they didn't reach down at least through the top 10, if a bit more, to at least collect the low-hanging fruit. There's also the privacy coins, Monero, Zcash, things of that sort, which really cryptographically, it's believed to be impossible for transactions to be tracked because everything is so thoroughly encrypted, you can't easily see what wallet it's coming from, what wallet it's going to, the amounts or anything else. Honestly, my suspicion is that those privacy coins are actually going to be banned in a number of countries. I believe that they've actually been banned in one or two, but of course, there have been a couple of companies which have banned other crypto. Yeah, it's very interesting because as more and more value moves over so that it can be moved untraceably, governments are going to lose more and more control. They're used to this to some extent, and it will be very interesting to see how they respond. There are already serious rumblings throughout the government issuance of money and things of that sort by the new IMF special drawing rights, or they're not so much new as they are that they've been very sparingly used in the past. But it looks like they're going to limber them up and start using them much more in the future. For those who don't know what they are, the IMF special drawing rights are effectively the creation out of thin air of a basket of currencies. So it is very similar to a individual government creating money out of thin air, but it actually tends not to have as much of an effect on a single given economy because it's actually a basket.
Yeah. Hey, Marina's got her hand up. Marina, what's your thought or comment? And Marina, I got to ask you, are you a GBA member yet? You ought, if not, you ought to be, because you're a very loyal follower. So we'd love to have you a member if you're not already.
I just have a really quick question, if you don't mind. I don't know if you can hear me. If somebody put some money in Zcash or Monero, or had the money in Zcash or Monero right now, and then it becomes outlawed, and it is in the private wallet, and they transfer it in the private wallet through decentralized exchange to Bitcoin, let's say, and then cash it out of Bitcoin. How is the government going to control it if it all happens on decentralized exchanges and private wallets and so forth? Also, I don't know if you saw, but on Monday, Zcash shielded transactions could be taken out of the ATMs.
So
I'm confused. Where is the government? The government can only control on-ramp and off-ramp as long as you're not keeping your money on centralized exchange.
right.
So if you're using Bitcoin, legal currency like Bitcoin, let's say, for on-ramps and off-ramps, and then doing everything else on either private wallet or decentralized exchanges, and use tumblers and mixers and all that crap and shielded transactions, where does the government able to stop you, please? And thank you for the compliment, Jeff.
Absolutely. So that was exactly the point that I was going to make, is that the federal governments are trying to control the on-ramps and the off-ramps. Generally, if they control them for the reasonably trackable currencies, they pretty much can track anything. But if you avoid the government on-ramps and off-ramps, if, for example, you're paid cryptocurrency for doing work. A lot of people who are blockchain developers will very often be paid in cryptocurrency that the government stands no chance of tracking. I've been paid in Ethereum from a company that originated in the Cayman Islands. I was good enough that I actually reported it, but I realized at the time too that the government had absolutely no clue and absolutely no real way of finding out that I had received that money.
Yeah, and let me share some thoughts also, and then Philip, I'll give you a chance. We'll recognize you so you can unmute yourself. So, so two things with respect to this. One is, one of the ways that the government and organizations are trying to comply, right, is, as it stands right now, any regulated financial institution must comply with U.S. law, U.S. law regulate. And if you fail to do it, then the U.S. government can essentially come after you. You can actually be arrested in a foreign country and brought back to the United States through because of extradition treaties and agreements, and so a lot of these fintech cryptocurrency exchanges, something that they will geo fence. So if you're coming from an IP address in the United States, they'll say, look, we don't want to have anything to do with you because we don't want Uncle Sam to essentially drop his sledgehammer on us. So because of that, they're saying, hey, if you're coming from a US IP address, you're not allowed to come in. But then folks are essentially just bypassing that with VPNs, right? Virtual private networks. Then you have other cryptocurrency exchanges. Mandela is an example, right? You can go to the Mandela exchange and you can essentially just sign up for something. There's no AML KYC, and so while they're trying to put lots of walls, there's holes all over the place, right? Now, in terms of reporting, here's the rub. What Mark just said is, he knew at the time he did that reporting, he knew that and he did it because I know Mark, he's a guy that is completely full of integrity, right? But when you disclose to the government, right, your blockchain transaction, right, it then gives the government another data point to be able to monitor more transactions. And so one of the things that one of the real, I've heard people say to me, I'm almost afraid to reveal a piece of it because I recognize it then gives the government much more visibility into all the other pieces, right? All the other transactions. If I let them know that I'm operating on this exchange, then they'll see everything, and it sets up a very strange dynamic, right? This sort of very counterintuitive. And let's go back to, do we trust large organizations? So people have a natural distrust for government, and they have to ask themselves, do I want to disclose additional information to an entity that I may not trust, or even trust less? So let me throw it over to Philip, and then I'll throw it back over to Mark if he's got any comments. I don't know how many of our slides we'll get through, but again, guys, this has been a great dialogue, and thank you for your questions and participation.
And thank you, guys. Very informative. Just a quick question. Just some thoughts here, right? With so much momentum now going into Bitcoin and Ethereum, right? Bitcoin has some limitations as far as the speed, Mark, you mentioned. Just it's more accepted. It uses up a ton of power. which is problematic. Do you see anything shifting with that momentum because of it just not being the ideal technology at this point?
I believe that cryptocurrency is here to stay permanently. I'm very bullish on cryptocurrency. But Gerard will also tell you that I'm incredibly bearish on Bitcoin. There is nothing that Bitcoin does that isn't done better, faster, cheaper by other cryptocurrencies. It's got a huge first mover advantage in that a few of the largest banks already have systems that deal with it. But the environmental costs are absolutely terrible. I've heard all the Bitcoin maximalist arguments for why Bitcoin is not as horrible as people correctly believe it to be. It's interesting though, because I also wouldn't count it out as dead. It's become the new gold. And everyone knows that things have value according to what people believe the value is. So I would never count it out. If I were giving financial advice, I would suggest that I personally would not invest in Bitcoin at its current value. Um, it was an awesome investment over the past number of years. I've made a lot of money on Bitcoin. On the other hand, it may also be reaching the end of its run.
So Mark and I have a great working relationship. Mark, I hope you will agree to that. But and we disagree oftentimes. This is one of the areas where he and I disagree. I'm a Bitcoin maximalist, right? And we have lots of conversations sharing each other's perspectives. And I think one of the things that's great about our relationship is we respect the other person's opinion, because at the end of the day, this is really about guesswork into the future, right? And we look at different data points and we value them differently. So I personally am I'm dollar cost averaging into Bitcoin. So I think that the price is still going to go much higher. And what's really fascinating, I want to go back, Mark, I want to go back to the concept of staking a little bit, right? Because we now have cryptocurrencies that are staked or backed by other cryptocurrencies. So you have a lot of cryptocurrencies that are now literally staked or backed by Bitcoin or Ethereum. And so, when people ask me all the time, well, what is it backed by, right? And we look at the US dollar and we say, well, what is it backed by? Our concept of what brings value to currency is very different, right? So I want to kind of go on. Mark, any final thoughts on this subject before I go on to the next slide? Okay. So I want to go back to this concept of liquidity mining. Just one last thing in terms of why do people do it, right? A lot of projects have realized that that there's much more stakeholder involvement, right? If people have sort of stake in the project, right, they're much more interested in doing this. And when people launch different liquidity mining projects, there's generally three types of mining launches, right? There's a fair launch, programmatic decentralization, and growth marketing. So a fair launch is basically where we say, hey, everybody in the community they get the same amount of token, this liquidity token. We want to give everybody an equal opportunity, right? A programmatic decentralization launch is where we're saying, hey, every month we're going to release a certain amount of token, and we're going to do it, based on kind of this algorithm, right? And then so that would be like, for example, if let's take Uber as an example. If you said, hey, we're going to do a programmatic launch, we're going to give every Uber driver X number of Uber tokens, right? That would be a fair launch. If we said, hey, every month we're going to release a certain number of Uber tokens to our drivers, that would be the second one. And then the growth marketing would be, hey, for every ride you do, for every ride you deliver, we're going to give you a token to incentivize the behavior to grow the community, right? And so these are just some of the reasons why I want to go back to the the Pancake decentralized ecosystem. So like Mark said, you need to be very, very careful. And I think we potentially do another event like this, talking about some of these scams and what to look for. So Pancake had a scam associated with it. You can Google it to find out more. But there basically was an error in the code, that the code had been audited, and the way that Pancake responded to it left a lot of people very disillusioned. So even though it claims to be decentralized, there's generally a project team, and that project team has a great amount of influence and authority over that system. So we're getting to the point over time, right, where these things become more decentralized. But especially early on, while they claim to be decentralized and they're kind of moving towards it, until that ecosystem really does grow, decentralization isn't necessarily baked in from the very beginning. Mark, what are your thoughts?
So I would sort of argue very slightly with the characterization of it being centralized. I don't know how many people have heard or read the article that Ethereum is a dark forest. And the reason why is that there are a lot of bots out there that are front running and behind running transactions. It's nearly impossible, and I can provide interesting articles on this, that if you discover that there's a problem with one of your smart contracts, it's actually very, very tough to correct it, because normally the operation of attempting to correct it invites some bot to come along, notice what you're doing, pull the money before you're able to pull it or correct it, and using a much higher transaction fee gets their transactions stuck into the blockchain before yours has a shot at it. This is what actually happened to Pancake Swap. It almost happened on Uniswap. There's a great article about that as well. The only contention that I have is that because these are smart contracts on the blockchain, they are actually accessible to everyone. Everyone can see the code. There is a core team generally who writes the contracts and publicizes them, but literally anyone could do what Uniswap does or PancakeSwap does. They are solely the size that they are through network effects. It's really tough to get people to invest in you, get your pool started up. But on the other hand, there are a lot of very small, very lucrative pools right now, and you can make a lot of money in them.
Yeah, that leads to Will's question. Will, do you want to go ahead and ask your question out loud? Let's see if anyone's got any thoughts or comments on it.
Sure. Yeah, no, the point that I was making is that there are thousands of coins available that you can invest in. The use cases in many of these coins are very similar. So really, do we really need that many coins? And with so much money invested in so many coins, it does remind me of the tech stock bubble in the 2000s, that absolutely you put your money in any stock and it would just grow. But to me, I think cryptos have a value when a utilitarian value when you can use them, when they're integrated into an economy, and we're far from that. So I think a lot of the players that are out there really, like, the top coins seem to make sense, but a lot of these other altcoins don't. So I'm starting to think that there's going to be a lot of people holding on to worthless crypto very soon when the bottom drops out. And I'm just kind of trying to figure out when is that going to happen? Because the market is manipulated by the market makers, the whales that want to really force movement in the market. So a lot of the newer investors don't seem to understand this, and they get caught behind the wave. And so when that bottom drops, like I said, there's going to be a lot of coins that are really worthless. And I just kind of wanted your thoughts as to when do you think people are going to start to realize this?
I think that many of the whales in many of the coins have already started to realize it, and they're trying to sell off their stakes. Um, I'll also point out that I think that this is where Bitcoin is in some cases, but the big difference is that as far as the miners are concerned, they're receiving a constant inflow of Bitcoins. So for them, it's not a matter of just getting rid of their current stake and, trying to get out with money and get out intact, which is the case for many of the smaller coins. But they also are the ones who are actively propping it up. There's some very interesting stats that you can find on the internet as to how many Bitcoin transactions are actually real transactions as opposed to market making transactions. I think that most of the smaller coins, most of the transactions are market making and or pump and dump schemes at this point. But will globally crash? I can't even begin to guess.
But my concern is what happens to the market when the bottom falls. I mean, we saw Bitcoin go to 3,000, a couple years back, and then it seemed like a lot of people exited the market, and so it could be devastating to the perception of crypto and actual the movement, because you want to see crypto sort of integrate into the market somehow. You want to see that integration within the market, and not just on the XRP or the banking credit swaps where that makes sense. You want to see people actually using crypto, not just taking a loan out from a card and then converting it to fiat. You want to see that fiat to crypto conversion. But if the bottom drops, I'm really concerned that a lot of people are just going to just look at it and say, oh, this will never take place.
Well, the thing that I would sort of point you to is, remember, this is still a very immature domain, but just like we have currency arbitrage, right? We're going to see more and more integration of different coins, right? And this will eventually normalize out. It's still too young for it to be stable, right? It's still relatively small. We don't have all those safeguards, those triggers in place yet. There's still lots of room for fraud and corruption and pump and dump. I mean, we're just not there yet, right? We will eventually get there, but we're just not there yet. Hassan, you had a question. Oh, I'm sorry, Mark.
Yeah,
once you're done, once you recognize Hassan.
Right. Just to address his immediate concern, I don't think that they're all going to crash that quickly. And I do believe that as more and more countries and central banks start moving to a digital currency, that is going to give the uninformed investors much more of a warm fuzzy. So even if a lot of the minor coins crash, I don't necessarily think that it'll wipe out the total market.
Hassan?
Yeah, my question is basically simple. I mean, I
Oops. Sorry, Hassan. I was trying to lower your hand and I accidentally muted you. So go ahead. Keep going with your question.
no, I've been thinking a lot about doing central bank digital currencies for let's say countries in Africa. The project started a few years ago for unbanked and unbanked people, but this was not decentralized. This would be by the governments. And my assumption was that these stable coins, once they get rid of the fiat, they would introduce something digital in which they basically access people that are unbanked and underbanked. And then it's not about the fact that we want their money, it's the fact that we can give them finance. So I see central bank digital currencies can work, but the thing that like I keep on pondering, because I've sat in a few rooms with some developers. I live in Massachusetts, so yeah, I'm lucky to be part of the Boston Blockchain Association, and and part of the developers, anybody can issue their own coin, and with this whole NFT market that opened up with prices that in my background, I also had an art gallery, so I got bombarded with artists telling me, "Hey, I want to do this. This is great. This is amazing." But it's all about the regulation. It's all about how do we go about it? What is going on? Is it a security? Is it a commodity? Is it a property? Is it a currency? And a lot of these questions, unfortunately, I mean, so far I think Luxembourg and Mauritius, or at least I'm familiar with Mauritius because that's where the foundation was set up so that we can work in SADC in the 26 countries in Africa. And Luxembourg have issued some laws that make sense. But I see the US and even Europe and the rest of the countries are far lagging back. So what is your opinion about when regulations are gonna come up, or soon, or when are they gonna be implemented in your opinions? Because you guys are all experts.
But Mark, before you answer, I just want to let Hassan, I don't know if you've seen this. We have a big event coming up in September. And if you own an art gallery, I want you to know about this call for entries to the Future of Money Governance and Law Art Show, which we'll be holding it at the United States Capitol. So for any of you guys that are interested in art, by all means, I want you to know about that. Okay, Mark, why don't you answer? And then when you're done, why don't you recognize Marina for her question?
Sure. So 2 points about the SEC. One is that they're very conservative, and they are very slow moving. On the other hand, while they frustratingly don't clearly state what their rules are going to be, I will contend that they're almost 100% predictable. I've never had a problem not being able to guess what the SEC would do, because invariably they just use existing law.
Paradigm.
Right.
So it's the old same paradigm that it doesn't shift.
And NFTs are going to be treated 2 different ways, I believe. One is that for the really high-end ones that truly are art, they're going to treat them exactly the same way that they treat paintings and the like. They are artistic creations. They're one-off, or they're a small number. They're sold. So whatever laws you use for paintings, it isn't going to change for NFTs. What will be interesting, though, is the dividing line between things where you are giving a certain number of pieces of art and you have a certain number of, say, very rare collectible cards in the card games. Currently, there's a serious gray area on, say, where very expensive Magic cards fall. And again, the NFTs are going to fall exactly the same way, but it's currently unclear even how the tax laws handle that currently. Maria?
I sent you something in the chat. I guess you don't look at the chat. I was wondering if we could connect on either Telegram or Signal, Mark.
So I put my email in. I am not currently using either Telegram or Signal. I try and stay in Discord and email.
All right, let me keep going because I want to get through some of these slides. So when we talk about how does DeFi work, we use the term smart contracts, and these are basically decentralized applications, right, or dApps. And they typically will have a trigger, and that trigger might be a hit because of a price or volume change. There's a sender and receiver, right? And it could execute a trade. It could move a token in and out of cold storage. It could create or burn tokens, but those are all typically what this decentralized application does, right? And it's created by a community. It doesn't exist on any one particular computer or server. It's essentially a decentralized application. They're typically accessed through a browser extension, right? Not a third party. And they read and write directly to the blockchain. So there's really no person or organization from a reporting perspective. And here's just some examples of DeFi platforms, right? Maker, Compound. So you can Google any of these. Again, you can get copies of the presentation and look at them and look at their relative advantages and disadvantages. We gave an example of MakerDAO. So they have over $7 billion worth of tokens locked up in the Maker protocol smart contract. It's a decentralized lending application on the Ethereum blockchain. It supports their token, right? It's a stable coin that's pegged to the US dollar. You open a vault, you lock in collateral such as ETH. And remember, this is what we're talking about. We have tokens that are backed up by other tokens. It generates their token as a debt against the collateral. And then DAI is the only stable coin that you can use without any limitations. Unlike the dollar backed stable coin, it does not hold, there's no USDs in a bank somewhere. The protocol relies on smart contracts to collateralize the Ethereum, the ETH to maintain price stability. And then they can, DAI holders can also lock it into their savings rate, which is essentially it's a contract that earns an interest. So it's and that interest is paid from the fees that it generates. So that's just an example of one of these projects. And then when you look at the components, right, there's all kinds of different wallets, right, that are hosted. There's software wallets and hardware wallets. And I'll just tell you, so an example of a hardware wallet would be like a Ledger Nano. Every time you essentially, anytime you interact with it, it's going to generate an entirely new address, right? So some of these do, some of these don't have AML KYC, right? Anti-money laundering, know your customer. There's a common phrase that if you don't hold the keys, it's not your crypto. You're essentially giving it to somebody else. And from a security perspective, if you lose your keys, you've lost them, right? Mark, you want to talk a little bit about what MetaMask is? And then before you do, let me just say this thing here on the right, just to let you know in terms of how widely decentralized these different wallets are. This is a screenshot from Telegram. So Telegram it's essentially a bot, right? You just, it's just a bot, and it writes directly to the blockchain, and you can create transactions. There's really nobody to go through. It's just a piece of software code that exists in a Telegram applet. So governments becomes just an exploding universe of ways that people can interact with blockchains without any sort of centralized management. You want to talk a little bit about MetaMask? MetaMask is, and then also a little bit about what swaps are.
Sure, absolutely. So MetaMask is actually two things. The first thing that it is a keychain. And what that means is that it can store your private keys on the local machine where they're safe, and it can perform all the necessary cryptographic operations so that your browser or programs on your machine can send information to and from the blockchain, issue commands and things of that sort. The GBA uses MetaMask as our keychain for interacting with our government business blockchain platform. MetaMask's second purpose is as a wallet. It can show you what coins you have. It can show you what transactions you've had recently. You can send and receive simple standard Ethereum transactions via MetaMask. And that includes both Ethereum and the various ERC20 and the like coins, also NFTs. On the other hand, the GBA does not use MetaMask as our wallet because we have a cross-blockchain token that requires a lot more information to send it. You actually can send it on the same blockchain with the MetaMask wallet, but if you're going to try and send a GBA token to a different blockchain, for instance, going from Ethereum to Hive or to EOS, you need to be able to send it saying, hey, this is the destination blockchain. This is the destination blockchain address, which doesn't necessarily correspond to an Ethereum destination address. So, as I said, MetaMask is both a keychain, which the GBA uses it as, and it's also a wallet, which is the primary way that it's used for most people when they're dealing with Ethereum or any sort of Ethereum clone, the Binance Smart Chain, Besu, and all those things. In terms of swaps, MetaMask recently added the capability to swap from one currency to another, as opposed to having to go through the hassle of a market or an exchange. The way in which it does that is actually via Uniswap, or it may well also go through Pancake Swap or something else. It's the very swap exchanges, liquidity pools that we talked about at the beginning.
Yeah, and Jeffrey, I want to get through a couple more slides, then I want you to ask your question about Dodd-Frank, which is a great question. Okay, atomic swaps. So this is basically what Mark was just talking about. So it's a smart contract that basically allows two parties to swap directly. And one of the things that's interesting about that the way the smart contract is written is both parties must confirm receipt of their So I'm going to send Mark some Gerard token for his Mark token, right? And both of us have to acknowledge that we have received those tokens before the swap essentially finalizes. So that's a little bit about the code behind it, and what that does is it removes the counterparty risk. So you don't need a bank or a letter of credit. That's pretty much how that works. And so, just a couple more slides here. As we think about what the impact is on individuals, right? We're now giving individuals entirely new ways to save, entirely new ways to invest. We're introducing this concept of staking, all kinds of different ways to pay. And then, but the impact is, from a tax and reporting standpoint, anytime, at least the way the IRS defines the requirement now, is anytime you buy or sell your cryptocurrency, we're not talking about moving it from one wallet to another, but anytime you buy or sell your cryptocurrency, so the ownership of that cryptocurrency goes from you to somebody else, it's a taxable event and you have to report it. We do have a GBA member company called Zen Ledger. They have a software that you can download, and you actually download your transactions directly into that, and it'll do all the calculations for your capital gains and losses. So if you don't know anything about that, by all means hit Zen Ledger. They're a great company and have a great product. In terms of the impact on financial institutions, so currently I don't have any savings in a regulated financial institution. All of my savings are in non-regulated financial institutions, because I don't need a bank anymore, right? I can essentially save my own money. But the question is, what will happen to banks, right? When people start saying, I can do much better by just by just the appreciation of different cryptocurrencies or by staking them in this project, right? And from an investment standpoint, you know, are investment houses going to want to invest in your project? You got a great pitch deck, right? You got a great theory, or, you know, cryptocurrencies as an asset class have been the best performing asset class, I think, in history, right? So is that going to suck investment dollars out of traditional projects, right? And then if deposits drop in financial institutions and the banks still have to make money, they are still too big to fail, right? The way they make money is by loaning money out to other people. They loan other people's money out because you made deposits in them. Are they going to go to the Federal Reserve and ask the Federal Reserve to lower the reserve requirements if deposits start to slow, yet at the same time, they still need to make money? Because this is what the supply of money has looked like. So we got off the gold standard in the 1970s. Look at 2008. These gray lines here are recessions. In 2008, we changed the rules. We did some quantitative easing, and you see the slope of the line changed until March of 2020, when this little thing called COVID hit. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. It's been in the news lately. COVID hit, and then the supply of money, after 250 years, we got to 4 trillion. 12 months later, we were at 18 trillion, right? So, and the supply of money is managed by the Federal Reserve, but now we have all of these new ways to bring value and add liquidity to the markets. Economists don't have any idea what those new models look like. And as money fragments into all these different places and ways to spend it, regulators are scratching their head right now trying to figure this whole thing out. I'm going to get to just one or two more slides. So governments use financial institutions to influence, monitor, and control, right? There's thousands of blockchains, tokens, exchanges, and wallets, right? What happens to how governments collect taxes and enforce laws? And how do you regulate all this, right? So there's a QR code so you can download the presentation if you like. And at this point, we'll just, how are we doing on time? 12:30. So I'll just leave it open for questions. And I'd love to hear, Jeffrey, your question about the Dodd-Frank.
Okay.
And, go ahead.
Hang on one second. Let's see. Here I am. This has been one of the most intelligent conversations I've heard on this subject matter in literally almost a year. I'm glad I discovered you, thanks to Hassan. I'm a former CFTC senior enforcement attorney, and I'm old enough, if you can tell by the gray hair, to have bridged and straddled the I call it financial market evolution and innovation from the early 1980s to the present, from floor-based trading to the electronic environments that we have now. And I'm not sure if it was Mark or Gerald or Will who made a comment earlier. You know, the regulators will always be frustratingly behind the curve. But I think one of the observations is there is really nothing new in the greater scheme of finance other than the technological means that blockchain and DLT represents. In terms of the problem at the moment is, you know, between the hypesters and the people who actually know something about market development. These new technologies are being applied to use cases in the existing framework, but the existing framework doesn't really match up or sync with these new products. These products are really, other than the tech, are nothing that we haven't seen before in the financial industry, either in the commodity futures derivatives markets or the securities world. Which brings me to Dodd-Frank. DeFi and when I look at some of the promised overnight interest rates on some of these platforms, having prosecuted boiler room operations, global boiler room operations in the past, these are accidents waiting to happen. And they strike me as being over-the-counter bilateral derivatives, especially in the swaps market. Clearly, within the remit of the CFTC, and the SEC and the CFTC have taken what I call tentative steps to stake out the domain of anti-fraud and customer protection. What brought us, if I could, at the risk of oversimplification, what brought us the financial crisis was nearly 8 years of opaqueness in the late 1990s, 1999, 2000. The CFTC sought from Congress to obtain some degree of reporting on the OTC swap derivatives market, and the Clinton administration swatted them down. The OTC derivatives market exploded during the 2000s and blew up in 2008. And the regulators were left in the dark. Nobody knew who had how much of what toxic bilateral derivatives. They didn't know the quantum. They didn't know who had them. And the market seized up because counterparties didn't know how to assess counterparty risk. I see the same problem recreating itself in the DeFi market. I like the innovation, but at the moment it's not at levels that are threatening. But like all good things, nobody thought GameStop stock, a $3 stock, would be $400 one day and just blow up on you. So I see we already have the established frameworks, in place to deal with some of these things, and to some degree, the traditional players who've been watching the bleeding edge experiments in the blockchain domain will begin to enter this market. Some of these players are too small. What happens when somebody, you can have all the smart contracts you want, but if you can't sue somebody or have legal process, and who are you dealing with anyhow? On a blockchain bilaterally, globally, it's guesswork. So I expect to see established regulatory frameworks emerge around the innovation that's going on. The SEC just issued a request for comments, and it's very narrow, very tentative as to special purpose broker dealer custody of digital asset securities, which is sort of a little tiny steps into bringing digital assets into existing frameworks. The EU is well on their way to establishing a framework, and I think the regulators, at least the ones that the big ones that count, which probably for now the EU and the US, they don't want to quash innovation, but at the same time, not having regulatory certainty about where do these instruments lie. Look, we have a framework for commodity futures derivatives and their taxation. We have a framework for securities market products and their taxation. We just don't know yet with some clarity, we might have a suspicion, but we don't know for certain how the IRS might tax certain things. But the IRS will be either the first or the last to the table.
Jeffrey, I think you're right in one respect, in that there's really nothing new in terms of what's happening here. However, I think the thing that does change is that it's about the reporting of this information, right? So while the government can say this is legal or illegal, their ability to observe those things and enforce those things, I think that's where the game changer is. Because as it stands right now, there's a relatively small number of federally regulated institutions that the government can, through its licensing with them, can compel them to report. But what happens when you fractionalize that into a billion different pieces, right? And so what are your thoughts with respect to that? And before you answer real quick, I want to say several people have asked me about training and courses. I'm going to circle back around to that, and I'll let you guys know how you can get all the training in just a few minutes. But I want to hear Jeffrey's thoughts on that.
Well, one of the words that I always hear tossed about on many online working groups, or not working groups, but discussion groups, is, well, we need to create liquidity. I analogize what's happening today to what happened in the commodity industry in the very late 70s, early 80s, when the commodity futures markets broke out of just being physical agricultural products and then branched out into metals, the energy complexes, stock index futures, and you name it. And a lot of products were developed. A lot of good ideas, were developed, and a lot of them died, and we're left with the survivors. Where did the liquidity gravitate to? And it's not a checklist exercise, but the one hallmarks of liquidity are not well understood. And what I mean by liquidity is the ability. It's like pardon the analogy. Trading in these markets has all the hallmarks of being what they call a Hotel California trade. You can check in, but you can't check out. You can get into the position, but you can't get out of it, because there's no framework for markets. There's no framework for market making. And the very nature of blockchain, at least as we're seeing it reflected in some of the coin-based products, is fragmented. And it's fragmented globally. It's hard to get a sense of where the depth of certain markets are at, whether it's real or not. There's no oversight over the markets. And again, a lot of it comes back to reporting. And information that gives people some confidence in the trading mechanisms, the pricing mechanisms.
Jeffrey, let me pause you for a second, because Mark is in violent agreement with everything you said, and just wants to join you. But let me give him a chance, and there are a few comments as well. Go ahead, Mark.
So there are a number of things that's really important to remember about the liquidity pools and the like. One is there has to be money being created for these returns. The money has to be coming from somewhere. And
can I also say, rather than money, is it money or is it value has to be coming from somewhere?
It's value, but in one very real sense, value is money.
Money.
Money is just fungible value. I disagree about the Hotel California analogy. I make a lot of money in liquidity pools, and the way in which you do this is that you put in X amount of money, you stick around for a certain length of time. Normally what I do is at regular intervals, I just pull out half of what I've made. And as long as the interest multiple is high enough that it doesn't crash before you've pulled out at least an equal amount of value, you can leave with a lot more money than you went in with. And you probably, when it crashes, you go, oh, well, that worked really well because you made good money out of it. The concern with regulation is that I'm not sure exactly how they really regulate a liquidity pool. The problem is that the only promise is, hey, we give you this percentage of the fees and we give you this little token here, and there is no stated value for the token. There are no promises made. The token is the equivalent of a gift because you're already receiving payment and there are absolutely no promises about it. Now, everyone else acts as if there are promises, and they see the huge gains that you make if you sell the token. But the token's not a security because it's not being sold. They'll certainly sit there and argue that, it's like airline miles in that, hey, for using our services, we're giving you a gift. So I'm not sure how these liquidity pools are going to be regulated.
Well, traditionally, markets in the U.S. Were indirectly regulated to some degree, meaning the SRO framework. It's a triple oxymoron, but basically, the way the SEC and CFTC regulate exchanges in the U.S. is, we have oversight over your rulemaking. We'll review your rules but we're going to leave it up to you how to engage with within reason with your membership. But exchanges in the development of new products always had a variety of ways to encourage the development of liquidity in new products, at least for short periods of time, 3, 6, 9 months, to see whether the new idea would take off on its own and generate external liquidity. But exchanges, having been a floor trader myself in an earlier incarnation, instead of giving you a token, they gave you a rebate on your clearing costs. So they would, to be a market maker in stock index futures, they would waive your exchange clearance and settlement fees. Call it a utility token. In this context, of a poorly defined version, but you could only use it as an offset against your clearing costs. So
hey Jeffrey, I need we're about 10 minutes out from our end time. Yeah, and so I wanted to do two things. Jeffrey, are you a GBA member?
Not yet.
How do you get out of bed in the morning?
now that's a good question to ask going forward prospectively. You don't know what you don't know.
Gotcha. Well, hopefully.
Gerard, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just invited.
Marina, you just cut out on us. You'll have to repeat that. Marina, we can't hear you.
Gerard, I'm going to let you finish up, but I can find you all your contact information on the website. So
correct. If you go,
glad to hook up with you guys.
If you go to gbaglobal.org, if you want to find my information or anybody's information under association, go down to members individuals. And you can, for those of you who don't know,
Great.
if you want to find anybody and any kind of expertise, this is a searchable database of our GBA members. You can search by
Great.
location, domain, use case, language. A lot of event planning folks use this to find speakers and members for the projects.
Fantastic.
Type in my first name.
Ah, there you are.
Yep, you get that.
Hang on.
And then here on the profile, you can see contact information, stuff like that. You can see the groups that I'm a part of. One of the things that we do is we have people in both geographic and domain-based working groups. So what ends up happening is we create a giant relational database of blockchain expertise. We're also both public and private sectors. So if you'd like to see, we currently have GBA members in about 500 different government organizations around the world, at local, city, state, national, international. Our goal is to really connect the public private sector so they can connect, communicate, and collaborate around this technology, because there's a lot of problems that we need to solve, and this is definitely a way to do it. We also have some events. I would like to encourage you, if you're interested in this subject, if you come to our calendar, we've always got tons of events. And the next one that's similar to this would be the state of cryptocurrency. If anybody's interested in being a speaker, if you come here to this event, you'll see the times, the different cities, and there's a speaker volunteer form. You can register also for that event. So please, if you'd like to speak at one of these events, please fill that out. Our next major event, well, we have one coming up in June. We have not publicized it yet, but that's going to be one of our events. It's called Blockchain and Liberty for All. It's going to happen June 18th and 19th. June 19th is Juneteenth. It's when the last of the slaves were finally freed after the Civil War. But this event called Government Blockchain Week will be September, last week in September, early October. Don Tapscott wrote the very first book on enterprise blockchain. Scott Stornett, I told you, put the first blockchain into production in 1991. And then we'll have folks from all over the world, from Alabama to Kazakhstan, Australian Trade Commission, Austrian Institute of Technology, the Blockchain Intelligence Group. So that when Mark was talking about folks that essentially do data analytics on the Bitcoin blockchain, these guys are they're similar to chain analysis and stuff like that. But we'll have everybody from Colorado, Virginia, Croatia. We got crypto.com, and we got Dash. So Dash is a privacy coin. European Commission, all sorts of Inter-American Development Bank, International Monetary Fund. This event is free for GBA members, right? US CFTC, Department of State. So it's going to be an incredible thing. And then the schedule, the final days will be the United States Capitol and the Congressional Auditorium. But we'll have events during at the British Embassy, the Embassy of Bahrain, U.S. Department of Commerce. The evening receptions are awesome. We have 3 evening receptions. One of them will be on the rooftop of the International Spy Museum. It's just incredible. But the final 2 days will be at the United States Capitol. So by all means, check out. We have the art show, which I told you about. We have an award ceremony. It's just a phenomenal event. If you'd like to see other videos of other events under resources, we have about 8 gigs worth of information. If you click on resources, you'll get to our video library of just incredible stuff, and all kinds of publications. There's a huge amount of resources available. Oh, and with regard to additional training. So some folks ask, I'm in the process right now of putting up our next sets of training, but we got blockchain foundations, technical specialists. These are let me see if I can get this over. These are the course, oh, that's the wrong one. These are the courses that I'm in the process of putting up right now. Training, I think this is it. Let me see if this is it. No, I keep grabbing the wrong one. All right. Anyway, there's this GBA trading information website. If you click on that, and you can identify any of these trainings that you're interested in. If you request more information, that'll take you to a form. You can tell us which of the trainings you'd like, legal specialist, financial specialist. If you fill that form out, as soon as we update the training calendar will send you a link with all those trainings. And so I really want to thank everybody. Was this helpful? Did you guys learn something?
Definitely. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good. I will say that GBA is, I hope that we're different than any other organizations. I really would encourage all of you to join if you're not members, because for two reasons. One, it allows us to continue doing this. And what we do is we bring people together from all around the world in terms of where currently we have active chapters in these locations. So the chapters create a local community, right, of public and private sector folks. And then, so that they create the local synergy. And then if you go under association to working groups, these are the different topics or areas that we cover, right? Artificial intelligence, acquisition management, asset management, aviation, big data, right? Campaign, cannabis, contract management, cybersecurity, economic,
So,
election.
were you a George Mason right before Hester?
What's that?
Were you a George Mason right before Hester?
I was at George Mason right before, but I didn't hear this.
Hester, the commissioner.
Oh yeah. Hester Pierce.
Hester.
Hester Pierce. Yeah. She.
Were you right there? Were you there right before her, or did you cross?
I don't remember her being. I was not there when she was at George Mason. I was at George Mason back when George Mason was more like a community college. But anyway, so these are the different working groups. So if you like what we're doing and you want to be a part of it, I would please encourage you to come to our membership tab, and you can see the different levels of individual membership. Anybody in government is free, and then we do ask our private sector folks to pay a little bit. It's relatively inexpensive, but it does allow us to do these things. And gosh, there's so much I'd like to tell you about what we're doing, but there's just not enough time. Anyway, so I would really encourage you to join us and be part of a group of people that are just really changing the world. So with that, any parting thoughts, questions, anything that we need to cover that we didn't cover?
Amazing, Gerard. Amazing, Gerard. Thank you so much. I'm constantly impressed by how much you've done and how much you continue to do and your trajectory in changing this world. This is Cheryl. Bye-bye.
Cheryl, thank you so much. I appreciate that you're part of the family.
We was trying to ask you a question for quite a while, but I think he's a little shy. Can you encourage him?
No, it was. I had a couple of questions. One was on, you had talked about liquidity, and I wanted to just chime in, indicating, the difference between fiscal policy and monetary policy. I don't know if that's the one that Marina was talking about. I had also indicated that, the global economy has the U.S. dollar, the fiat dollar is entrenched into that, and to get rid of fiat, specifically with crypto, would almost be impossible. But I wasn't too sure which question she had, but those were kind of the two comments that I had made in the chat room. And the question that I also had, if we have a few minutes, I think that really what's holding crypto back on the blockchain level is the consensus mechanism, and that there really is no solidified mechanism that people are gravitating to. And once a consensus mechanism appears that people can find trustful, I think that's when the blockchains will be able to move to a 2 or 3.0 purpose. So I think the consensus mechanism is what's holding back a lot of the adoption on the consumer side of this.
So let's do this because those are great topics, and I love talking about monetary policy and fiscal policy and consensus mechanisms and all that. But we're a little out of time today. So the next event that we're going to do on the subject of cryptocurrency will be April 27th, right? State of cryptocurrency. And look, if you're free or available, then why don't you sign up? And and then feel free to fill out the speaker volunteer form if you'd like to potentially be a speaker on that subject, or just sign up. And I think that those are great topics for us to kind of start. This is part of a brand new series that we're doing. It's the GBA mining and cryptocurrency working group. But that's I think starting with monetary and fiscal policy, just to sort of like lay the groundwork, right? And how do we see cryptocurrencies kind of, moving into that place? But we're going to be doing this one every month.
Is there a pre-speaker strategy to sort of go over and hash out how the speakers will discuss things?
Yeah, we do that every Saturday.
Okay.
Every Saturday. So if you go to the events calendar and you go to calendar view, now that's a working group meeting. So let me go back to the last page. So here's a GBA mining and cryptocurrency working group. And you click there. Now I'm a member of this working group. It's got all the call details there. So that's what that's all about.
Can you post a link to that group?
It's in the GBA mining and cryptocurrency working group that's open to GBA members. So I can't post that publicly. I can only post that's only available to the GBA members. So this group right here we do as a public open group. It's an opportunity for everybody to interact together. But the GBA working groups essentially are exclusive to GBA members. All right. Any other thoughts, questions, ideas, comments, fears, uncertainties, and doubts? All right, guys. Listen, I want to thank you all again.
Hi, Gerard. Juan Cabrera here.
Juan Cabrera, ¿cómo
Yes,
estás,
sir.
amigo?
Oh, very well. Amazing meeting today. Very insightful. Just a quick one about the government consultant course.
Yeah.
I understand that that you're doing one or developing it.
Yeah. No. It's actually already developed. I talked with Eric last night, who is our director of training. Here we go. So that's consulting course we're going to do on July 9th, on October 1st, on December 10th, and on April 1st. And I'm reaching out to the other working groups to get the dates for when they're going to offer their other specialist courses.
Okay, are you going to do that course yourself, or is it going to be Eric?
He and I might alternate back and forth. That's a one-day course, and what's really cool about that course is that's what we refer to as a master class. So we get people together and they actually build out a blockchain solution, put together a business plan. We talk about all the tokenomics of if they have a token, all the architectural issues, and it's really designed for somebody to get some hands-on experience kind of mapping out a blockchain project.
Right, July 9th.
July 9th, yeah. So as
Okay.
soon as I have a few minutes, we'll get that posted up on the website.
Okay, thanks.
All right. All right, you guys have a great day. It was a pleasure spending some time with you, Mark. I'll try to give you a call around 5 o'clock. I should be on the road. We ought to be able to get all that done. All right. Bye, everybody.